Minutes for our last meeting dated June 22nd, 2020. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Aaron.
Second.
Thank you, Bill. Do we have any questions, corrections, updates to the minutes?
No.
Yours, Chair Inkerman.
Yes, just the ones that I mentioned. And so those revised minutes are being sent out, correct?
They will be, yes.
It will be, yes.
Thank you. So next on the agenda, then we need a motion to pass.
Yeah, why don't I just cover those changes really quickly verbally?
That'd be great.
So that people don't have a question about what they're voting on. So Chair Inkerman sent these in earlier today. There's a question on page 4, a statement that reads, the idea if we were going to transfer money back to the general fund to pull out at least amount necessary to do THE. The two approved projects are the village board agenda this evening to the sum of $33,100. The suggestion was that to end the word, reword the sentence to read as follows. The idea was if we were going to transfer money back to the general fund to pull out at least money necessary to do it, the two approved projects that are on the village board agenda this evening to the sum of $33,100. So that actually makes a sentence and makes sense. So thank you for that, catching that.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the minutes as amended.
Okay. Do we need a roll call for approval?
I want to verify, I'm trying to juggle a couple things here. Was there
Sorry.
a first and a second of those?
Yes.
Thank you. So, Member Meyer,
Aye.
Member Toll,
Aye.
and Chair Inker.
Aye.
The meeting minutes are amended and approved.
Thank you. At this time, we've allocated 15 minutes at this meeting time for any individuals who would like the opportunity to address the Finance Committee on any matters that are not listed on the agenda. Do we have anyone in the queue, Glenn or Drew?
We have a couple people, attendees of tonight's meeting, but none of them have raised their hand looking to offer anything at this time on the agenda.
Okay, I'll just give a moment to make sure that stays that way.
I think you're clear to move on.
Okay, so hearing none, let's move to the order of business. The first item would be a discussion regarding the 2020 property tax levy estimates and the police pension actuarial recommendations. So can I turn it over to you, Bettina?
Sure, thank you. Glenn, am I free to share my screen? Take that as a yes. No, I am not.
Okay, give me 1 second. Let me try to help you with that.
Okay, thank you. While I'm trying to get screen sharing enabled, at about 3:45, 4 o'clock today, I received draft or temporary estimated EAV numbers from the county, which changed a little bit of the spreadsheets and the estimations that were provided to you earlier. Not a whole lot. I gave Drew the draft numbers before I left, and I just wanted to share the screen. You know, there's a difference of about $3,000 overall. So I just wanted to share the screen so you could see the differences with CPI. I don't know if that's...
You should be clear to share.
Am I clear to share? Okay.
There we go.
So this summary portion of attachment A that kind of reviews with CPI, no CPI, and the freeze meaning leaving the EAV as was and no CPI. Shows,
Bettina, could you drag that window open a little bit bigger?
Sure. Like that?
There we go. Even,
Bigger, yeah.
yeah, even if you go out and go up to view and bump it up a notch.
Because we don't really need to see the blank part to the right, just kind of make everything
Correct.
like
Correct.
125%, something
Right.
like that.
Yeah, if you could take that and go to view, and there we
Oh,
go.
yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thank
Sure.
you. Thank
You're
you.
We
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate that.
Sure, no problem.
I'm trying to watch it here at home too, so.
No problem. So the original number on attachment A showed with CPI that we would have 117,664 here. Without CPI, there's no change, and then obviously with the freeze, there's no change either. So the difference with EAV didn't produce a whole lot of change with the EAV updates from the county. The biggest drivers, if you're curious about what those changes were, this number went to 589, 989, 986, and we had estimated it at
586.
586, 590, 586. Sorry, 596,094, and those were numbers that we had taken from the county's website, thanks to Glenn's technology magic there. But the numbers went down, and I think that's primarily related to, which we wouldn't have had at the time, the exemption numbers that aren't out on the site. And those numbers, particularly this one, is substantially different from what we saw in the year prior. So that's driving some change to the EAV, and that seems to be pretty flat. So I'll take you back to the original CPI, no CPI versus freeze that Drew had asked me to calculate all three ways. So some of the numbers that were presented in the original memorandums are a little bit askew or off, but for the most part, there wouldn't be too much of a change to the percentages or calculations because the numbers are pretty much close. The biggest driver in what happens to the general fund and how this money is allocated and distributed is, of course, the police pension levy, and that is attributed to the actuarial report that was received. And unfortunately, April 30th was the snapshot date for that reporting, and at that point, the market had some considerable downturns in our investments. Had that reporting been done 30 days later, the report would have been considerably different, and so would our likely estimated contribution. So, you know, we're a victim of that April 30th snapshot. If we were a calendar year, December 30th end date, we'd be looking at a different contribution level. But that's what's driving the increase there to the police pension levy and causing this change, if you will, to the general fund. I don't know, does anyone have any questions with regards to what was presented in the packet for the levy?
Well, the good news and the bad news with the police pension is that, you know, although it requires more of a contribution now, what that does is sets us up when the market turns around a little bit. We'll be better positioned, you know, for kind of recouping some of that when the market turns up. So it just gives us a better position in the long term. I would think that's fair to say. Is that right?
Yes, that's fair to say. And there's been considerable rebound already. I mean, At this point, we were under 10 million and we're already over 11 again. So there's been considerable swing in the balances there.
Yeah. Anybody else have any comments in the discussion regarding the property tax levy?
I guess the discussion that needs to be had is what we're most comfortable with as far as including the CPI and the additional EAV in our levy, right? And I think that conversation can at least be started tonight.
I really, just for a point of conversation and note, there really is little to no difference in the calculation with freeze or including the EAV. So I'm not sure that that should be a consideration, but that's up to you.
Yeah, and I agree. I think I think capturing the new value, I think we can certainly justify would make me more comfortable to hold off on the CPI for the coming year, especially with so many people in unknown financial situations currently.
Well, looking at the CPI number itself, I mean, the CPI percentage, 2.3%, that number seems like a realistic number, but what we really don't have the full flavor for is, what the COVID-19 situation is going to do to, I guess, a lot of things. And we know the impact, at least at that snapshot point in time, for the police pension fund meant that we needed to contribute, almost 15% more than we had in the prior year. And that's cash that we need to come up with today. And as I said, it probably will benefit us in the long run, but it does mean that we've got to have that contribution today. And so that would be one factor that I think is really significant that we need to really think about. And also, obviously, the effect on homeowners. I mean, people are concerned about high property taxes, but we're also concerned about stormwater and some of these, the pension liabilities in general, some of these big issues that we need to continue to chip away at, and that is to the benefit of all the citizens that we do that. The memo also did point out the effect on homeowners. And Bettina, would you just briefly address the way in which you summarized the effect?
Sure. So the impact to a market value home of about $750,000. But this was assuming the EAV that I had. But like I said, the change wasn't too dramatic. It shouldn't take too much of a swing. So it's approximately a $25 increase for a $750,000 home, including CPI, and an $18 increase with non-CPI levy estimates.
So with those figures on this average home of $750,000, we literally have a tax burden difference that is about $7, right?
Right.
It's a swing of about $40-something.
Oh, between the two, yeah.
$18 decrease. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I understand that our the dollar amount is not very much from just the village's standpoint per homeowner, but if all of the taxing bodies that are on somebody's tax bill follow the lead of not including CPI or trying to keep their increase to a very minimal amount with whatever options they can, that adds up to real money. So yes, it's a $40 change to a $750,000 home on the village's standpoint, but I think whatever we can do to help homeowners, and also perhaps that means us foregoing one of the non-essential projects for a year. But I think we should try to do whatever we can.
So we represent what, maybe about 20 to 25% of the total tax bill, correct?
About 10%.
Thereabouts. Is that right, Bettina?
10%.
Yeah, I was going to say about 9 or so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, so it's even less than I was recalling off the top of my head. So I suppose Aaron's got a point there in that if we're 10% and everybody, raised it by $40, that's $400, and that's something people are going to start noticing.
Right.
Well, I just look at the pension swing from last year to this year being $100,000. It's not a new line item. It's not a new program. It's not a new service. It's a big outstanding liability that continues to grow and change as the village grows and change. And so that's one concern that I have. And also just the exponential multiplication of the effect of not increasing one year does affect the next year and the next year and the next year. You know, I also put into the equation the responsibility that we have to do the greater good for the village, and have we been good stewards of the property taxes and the other revenues that we get. And you know, given our significant issues with stormwater and trying to address some of these long outstanding problems and some of these issues, that's a big factor in you know, doing what we can to address these.
I totally agree with you, Barbara. I think we have issues and we have projects that need to be looked at and need to be fixed. But most people right now are kind of putting off some projects that they were hoping to do this year, and I feel like there's the village should be no different in that matter. I mean, we should be, if we knew our revenues were going to be down for taxes, so we delayed some projects. I think we could do the same thing here, knowing that a lot of people's income is potentially going to continue to suffer. So why should we expect them to continue to contribute more for community-wide projects when we could keep it flat or even reduce slightly?
I agree with Barbara. There's a political and a fiduciary responsibility here, and the visibility of taking a 2% shift and a $25 shift on a $750,000 home. And by the way, the median home in Lake Bluff is less than 700. It's more like closer to 600 as an aside. But so that I would say that translates into perhaps a somewhat even smaller piece. But we've faced this prospect before. We've answered this question before in circumstances where incomes and other things have been challenged as well. I think that there is a concern about the exponential issue and the multiplicative factoring that Barbara mentions. The tough part, I think, is when you get down to certain projects. Those certain projects often have very significant meanings to different constituencies in the community, and oftentimes it's very difficult to justify to those folks is that we are foregoing something because we've shifted it below the bar on the project list. And the other thing I'll say, and at the risk of someone suggesting I'm being political, in the back of my mind, I'm concerned that the investment climate could be very different 6 months from now than it is today. And in terms of the valuation of our pension fund. The market is at an exceedingly high position today, and depending on a lot of other factors out there, we could easily be back where we were 6 months ago, 5 months ago.
So does that speak in your mind to then not?
I think that what it ends up doing is it ends up putting us in something of a coffin corner at a couple levels if we don't take advantage of the PTEL and go in that direction. It is a modest sum of money. I'd like to think that I think that it would be kind of cool if everybody was looking to the village of Lake Bluff to drive their all of their decision making. I really don't think that's the case. And so I'm not sure that everybody's lining up to expand their tax bills by 2.3% because that's what Lake Bluff did.
Well, on that end, that if everybody else is going to be increasing, then our $40 might.
Well, I appreciate that.
Feel pretty good.
But that's my point is that folks aren't going to be sitting around, I don't think, and saying, well, you know, Lake Bluff is 9%, and the other taxing bodies in District 65 are going, well, the village did this, let's do that. I'm not sure that that's the conversation.
The taxing body elected representatives might not be doing that, but if we do, there are certainly people watching who might talk to those other representatives and say, well, the village is figuring out how to do it without the increase. Can't the whatever?
You know, Aaron, there's no question we can figure out a way to do it. The question is whether it's an appropriate extension of our fiduciary responsibility to do so, and for the good of the financial good of the village, and you know, sometimes it comes down to taking the tough decisions, and saying in the long run what's best for the village. And my concern again is that it puts us in kind of a corner financially at the end of the day, because this year's increase impacts next year's increase, which impacts next year's increase. We have a rather conservative situation. We're faced with the prospect that we may be more challenged next year to pay even more into our pension obligations than we are this year because the market tanked.
Well, I would argue if the market stays anywhere near what it is right now, and our snapshot.
I'd like to hope that
I would hope that our contribution will probably be less next year.
So
since we paid more than we actually needed to this year.
I can only say that I'm sharing what we faced over the last 8 years, and we were in similarly challenging financial circumstances, and we were having the very same conversations about the financial condition of our residents. And I'm retired. I'm on a fixed income. My wife is retired now. So, I mean, believe me, I'm there. But at the same time, putting on my hat, I'm going, not everybody's buying into the fact that when something they think needs to get done, we're sitting there and saying, well, we don't have the money to do it. Sorry. Well, why not? So, anyway.
There will always be projects that people want done that we don't have the money for.
Yeah, I understand that. Thank you. Forgive me. It's not pizza and it's not a sub sandwich, but
I think maybe
my wife pointed out that, speaking of saving money, we haven't had to spend money on pizza at these meetings for a long time.
Joy, do you have something to say?
Pizza sounds good. I think kind of just building off of what Aaron was saying, I don't know, you know, we always talk about increasing. I'm always wondering if there's a way that we can be more efficient with the dollars that we're getting, that are coming in. And it would be nice this year if we could give people a little break, because it has been a tough year for a lot of people. And so I know that we look at, if we don't bring as much in, we can't do as much, but sometimes that forces us to look at things in a different way and be a little bit more efficient with our dollars. And I know our village does an excellent job at being efficient. And I know that we've really managed a lot of the low-hanging fruit, but it might force us as a group to reassess things and look at things and try and be a little bit more creative about how we're handling things. And the other thing I did want to say is that, and this kind of goes along with Mark's idea, for me, a $25 increase in the village is nothing compared to what I usually see for the school districts. So as a taxing body, for us, that 10% that we take is so small compared to the rest of my tax bill that, you know, I guess if I really wanted to see my tax bill decrease somewhere, it would have to be, it would be more significant if it was in one of those bigger areas like 115 or 65.
Regis, I don't think.
Yes.
Yes.
No, you know what? I will support what Joy and Aaron were saying. Where I've met many people who had financial difficulties. This is an extraordinary year, and the thing I hear also is, I mean, this is not a fun year, and what I hear also about Lake Bluff is, well, taxes are higher than anywhere else. True or false? I don't believe that, but this is the perception. That's the only thing I would like to highlight. And so the fact that we are during a difficult year, 2020 is not a good year, and that we're thinking about going up 2-3% is not a good, it's not great. That would be my only comment. And this is all about perception, by the way. So that's where I would stay.
One thing that I'm thinking is the reasoning behind the 2.1, or what is the percent, 2.3, whatever the percent is that represents, you know, a basket of general consumer goods that change in their cost year to year. So when there is CPI that is a percentage, what that represents is that the same things that we did last year, it's going to cost that much more to do it this year. And when we have the contribution for the pension fund going up $100,000, if we don't increase, so now we're going to start out of the gate with, you know, approximately 2% more in our cost for most things, and we're also going to have $100,000 more in pension liability that we need to fund today. And okay, let's start being more efficient. There's $100,000 and some plus that we're, okay, you know, where are we going to get that? Who are we going to disappoint? Who are we going to, what program are we not going to do? What street are we not going to pave? You know,
but Barbara, this is I think there are two constituents to the dialogue here. There is the citizens of Lake Bluff, our community, and there's the village of Lake Bluff. Some people are having difficulties. Does that mean that we should continue our business and or raise our tax levy by 2.31% without consideration to the people having difficulties? That's one thing. And that's Aaron's point. On my end, I also add to the point that this is a perception issue, that is, Lake Bluff is insensitive to, I mean, is having the perception of a high tax rate and is insensitive to the people in Lake Bluff. That is what I am putting on the table.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in a little bit here. There are lots of projects that we need to have done. We know that. And I also know the ramifications, which seems like a small increase for us, approximately $40. And then if we don't take the PTEL, it does compound itself as we move on. But I will also agree that for many people, it's an extraordinary year. Mm-hmm. And I think we make a statement, and it may be a very small statement, that we freeze. We freeze and realize that we have to relook at our budget. We realize that we have $100,000 more that we're going to pay for the pension fund. And then when we look at projects, we're going to have to be tough. That's the downside, and that's the side we have to take if that's what we choose to do. And I think we should freeze this year. But that also means we look hard at our projects and decide what can we do and what we can't do. And we have to be really understanding that can't just give. We have to really, really hold to the fact that we will have less money. And that's not easy, particularly when it's a pet project or somebody's friends are clamoring for something or whatever. This is a small town. That happens. So I would suggest that we do go with a freeze. Hopefully that might or might not. Hopefully it might have an impact on the other taxing bodies. But realize that we will be making some hard decisions this year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Barbara, having heard what everybody has to say, I think where my vote's going to be will be with the freeze. I'll go with Aaron's point of view, and I think that's where I'll end up voting. And we can make not only a statement with this, but having heard from Joy as well, let's tighten the belt.
Just for clarification, is that a freeze or is that a with the EAV, capturing the new value but not increasing the CPI bill?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I'd be okay with capturing the new value. That doesn't actually, can Bettina explain what that means in plain terms?
Thank you.
So I have, in plain terms, this is probably the best explainer here on the screen. So when EAV increases, the tax rate decreases to ensure that we receive the dollars that we need. And conversely, which is what's happening this year, when EAV, based on the estimate, which will likely change a little bit more as we get the final numbers from the county, and my experience has been that those numbers actually go down a little more than the estimate. So the tax rate would increase to ensure that we receive the dollars that we're entitled to. So all that means is to get to the number that we're calculating, the rate would increase a little bit more.
Okay, so I think what Aaron is advocating is essentially the blue column with no CPI,
right,
to be precise.
This one.
And the overall impact of that, the negative impact of that on our revenue overall is therefore about 100,000.
Right. So the overall impact is going to be looking to recapture how we're funding the increase to the pension levy, really.
Okay. All right. So then to clarify Aaron's point, I think my vote would be with the no CPI column or option here. Let's capture the EAV, and that's not a bad compromise.
Does everyone feel like they've adequately voiced their opinion on this? I obviously would rather take the CPI, but I yield to the majority of the committee.
So, Chair Ankerman?
Yes.
This is only the first conversation about the estimate. And
right.
Between now and the next meeting, which should be within 2 weeks, hopefully we can go back and revisit the data with, again, only having received it 2 hours ago.
15 minutes ago.
Yeah, review that with them and make sure their numbers are accurate,
yeah.
right? And scrub that, and then we'll come back to you with this in mind. And then
will this come back to a finance committee meeting or a board meeting?
No, I think we can go to the finance committee meeting. I think there'll be another one. If there's not, we certainly have the direction. And what happens is this estimate takes the form of a resolution in front of the village board in November, usually the first meeting in November.
Right.
So.
Rue, can you draw a picture? You and Bettina draw a picture of the impact of this, and when we absorbed the better part of $100,000 already in the last 6 to 12 months, as we cut our budget and whatnot, and you were able to kind of apportion that and kind of draw us a picture of where those lost programs and whatnot were coming from. Can you kind of draw us that kind of a picture again of how this might impact us?
I'm not certain I follow the question.
Mark, are you referring to the project priority list?
Well, no. This is more, folks. This is more than project. This is operations. This is the whole village budget. We're not just talking about when we cut our budget back in March and April because of the loss in revenue to the village, that was the better part of $75,000 or $100,000, as I recall. We're now talking about pulling another $100,000 out of the budget. When this came to us back in March and April, staff was able to say, we need to tighten our belt because we're going to have less income. And these are the areas where we expect we're going to have to draw those funds away from. All I'm asking for is, would it be possible to look in the crystal ball and say, okay, if we're going to have to tighten down another $100,000, where would that come from? What would we, whether it's projects, whether it's operations, whether it's,
who and what are we disappointed?
Where's the money going to come from?
Yeah, no, I hear you.
To reflect that.
Yeah, I hear you. And I'll try to be brief, knowing that we're time sensitive. But I think the answer is, when we first did this, we did modify some operations, but mostly of it was postponing capital. And I suspect that will be the first place we look at, where possible and where practical. We would recommend that, probably in deferments and investment in our own equipment replacement fund, and also some projects may just not move forward, again, because it's beyond our control whether IDOT funding and other dollars will be available to take on certain projects. So my instinct tells me that's where we would go first and foremost. We did do some, again, we did do some operational changes. At the same time, we've also increased some other operational costs. Namely, when we talk about ambulance rates here in a minute, we know we've taken on a bigger burden there. And we also know we're facing certain known rate increases with our collective bargaining agreements, but it's that juggle. But I would do, the brief, quick answer would be, we look at capital.
Okay.
Okay.
Following on Mark's comments, do we have actually the freedom to change contribution to the police pension, for example? Is that the thing we can do, or we are bound to make the same contribution?
Well, it's actually a complex calculation, and there are a number of methodologies that you could use, and Bettina can talk to this better than I can, but it does seem like, well, gee, why don't we just not contribute that much? But it's, their financial policies have determined which methodologies they choose to use, and it's not something that they change, easily. Like the wind is now blowing from the west-northwest, so let's just change our methodology. So Bettina could answer that better, though.
You rely on the actuarial calculation to determine the calculation amount, and there's a minimum statutory number that the state calculates through their actuarial, but they use a different calculation that will not bring us to the 90% funding requirement that the state has put out to be funded by 2040. So we use the more conservative, which turns into a higher contribution number by our own actuary to get to that statutory funding requirement by 2040. So in answer to your question, to meet the legal requirements, you really have to use the contribution levels that are being calculated by your own private actuary and not the state minimum required number. So you could fund it at a lower number, but you'd never make the statutory requirement. And then additionally, in less than 30 months, we are going to be required to turn over all our investment funds to the state investment pool, and the state will be taking over the investment oversight as well as the actuarial calculations, and we're really not sure. That's kind of an unknown how that will all play out and how they'll calculate our funding contributions and whether we'll still be required to hire actuarials on our own to come up with our own contributions and look to how that investment pool functions. So there's a lot of moving pieces happening in the next 30 months before June of 22. So to reduce or change the number could have some significant long-term effects.
Yeah.
Tina, would
That
that
I
be
wasn't aware of that, and that's damn scary.
But Tina, I noticed in the memo in the packet, the statutory minimum is $611,355. Is that right?
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
And then the actuary determined that it's $849,000.
Right.
What would be the effect of, say, not as a policy going forward, but of doing perhaps 1 year, reducing our contribution for 1 year, knowing that it might not get us to where we want to be as fast, but because this is a lean year for everybody, it might make sense to reduce that contribution, especially if we think that because of the snapshot of April 30th, it may actually be an estimate that's too high, that's more than needed.
But it's too high to our benefit. I mean, it's like when is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago, and here we're trying to, make up for the 20 years ago that people didn't put away the pension liability, as the nest egg.
Well, absolutely. But if we know that revenues are going to be down this year, and not because of our levy, but because of potentially sales tax decreases.
But here's the thing, though, Aaron. If you say we're going to forego $100,000, let's just say not just as a big number. Let's forego $100,000 this year, which means effectively next year we have, assuming next year is a good year, we have to come back with $200,000. And the reality is that even in our best of years, we've talked about our PTELs generating perhaps an increase of $75,000. So now, looking forward a year or two, that means that we're actually going to have to double or triple our contributions, assuming a steady state with everything else in the budget, which is to say, assuming we don't keep hacking away $100,000 a year in reducing our cost base, eventually all this comes up and catches up with us. And now we're sort of like the state of Illinois. We suddenly find ourselves these hundreds of thousands of dollars in the hole and behind.
Yep.
And so it puts us, I wasn't aware of the situation with all this going to the state. These are the same people who've gotten everybody in the state of Illinois, saved from the pension group that takes care of Drew and village staff, the teachers, everybody. I mean, this is like a potential catastrophe.
Well, I think let me chime in, because one of the things that certainly at the state level, and we all know how that gets, is the Illinois Municipal Fund, which is the most thing, and it's almost 100%
right.
funded, is by far the best and well done. And they're looking at this point to try to replicate that, or try to at least combine some of that, so that it potentially, I will say, could be more sound operation. Again, it's potential. The other thing is, which is being more than floated out there, is to change the 2040 deadline date, where you have to have 90% funded for all communities. Change that to 2050. Now, what you've done is that you have kicked that down the can.
Exactly.
And that's what you have to watch. There are lots of moving parts out there. There is a chance, and that was the whole intent, that these funds will be more astutely invested, and there will be more controls over them. So that is out there too. So you need to know there's a lot of moving parts. I agree.
Barbara, forgive me for prolonging this discussion. I know we've got other things, but I apologize.
No, I'm actually quite pleased. I am very concerned about foregoing the CPI, and I don't know at which point that this discussion turns into direction such that we can't change it. So at least I'd like to at least put that out there to either Bettina or Drew. We're not signing on the dotted line, committing in stone. But at what point do we say, really, this is our chance to say what we're going to do? What's our last opportunity? Is it before the November meeting? Is that it?
Probably. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this has been our first robust conversation about it. I think we'll probably all ruminate about it and talk to our constituents about it, and perhaps at the next meeting have some opinions that have migrated a little bit. I don't know, but I feel like we've had a great conversation. We've heard a lot of good arguments on both sides, and if Bettina and Drew, if you feel like we've addressed all the items that you had put before us, then I would suggest that we move to the next item on the agenda. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay. The next discussion regarding ambulance fees, and I know that the schedule has changed in terms of what Lake Forest is billing to Lake Bluff, and then there's the next piece, which is what Lake Bluff then bills to residents who use their services. And it's a formula that's changed a little bit. So, Bettina, I don't know if you have a graph or a chart that you want to share, similar to what was in the memo. Yeah.
I don't, Barbara.
Okay,
I have the memo.
That's great. So I was trying to look at the big picture with the structure of all the pieces, and there's a couple of different services that are given, whether it includes transport, no transport in the end, if it's just simply a lift assist, or if the service is then canceled. The new rate structure looks like there's a fee for the basic transport, and then no transport is a lesser fee, but that's not the same as what we would then charge to the resident who uses the service. And the same could be said for the lift assist. There's a new charge that's less than a transport, but what we would then charge to the user of the service would be much less than that. So overall, the new structure for, we kind of every year need to look at the total expenses that Lake Forest is kind of putting into their bucket so that they can create the new rate structure, and then we need to put those numbers in and see how our structure is to bill to our the users of the services. And I kind of put these things together, and I don't know if I'm looking at the big picture in the correct way. The total number of calls year to year seems to hover for transports around 200, and then in total, high 200s. And the difference being, there's some no transports and lift assists, et cetera. So given the new structure, if we extrapolate out what Lake Bluff might be paying to Lake Forest for all these services, it looks like about, on a yearly basis, about $400,000. Does that sound like a good?
That's in the ballpark. Yes, that's in the ballpark. Yeah.
Right. So and to get there, I just said, okay, we'll have about 200 transports at $1,732. We'll have about 50 no transports at $990. I just kind of extrapolated that out. So about 400,000 is what, again, Lake Bluff pays to Lake Forest to provide the service, and then what we end up billing to our residents ends up being about 226 or 7,000, based on the structure that's given in the chart. Now, the piece that I thought was kind of interesting, it says that on average, current billings are at a collection rate of about 45%. So does that mean that of that 226,000 100,000, that only 45% of that might be collected? Is that what that's saying? Okay, so then if we take that collection rate, we're actually down to about 100,000 that the village collects. Is anybody else hearing that?
I do.
Yes.
Yeah, Barbara, I am, and I'm not hearing some of, I think, other people because of that.
The feedback.
There's something going on where I can't hear.
Started. It's either that or Mickey Mouse has gotten in the way.
Exactly. Everybody should put their mic on mute if they're not talking. That would probably help.
It's like the chipmunks joined us. Okay.
See, now that fixed it. No, it didn't. I'm going to talk and see if that, as soon as I talk.
Yeah, it's still happening even with everybody on mute. It's a Zoom problem, I bet, guys.
We may want to reinitiate our meeting before the village board meeting here.
That's a great idea, Mark.
Okay.
Mark and Bill, you sounded normal.
Sounds fine now.
Thank
So-
you.
Yeah.
I think we've eliminated the noise. The noise is now gone.
Okay, fantastic. So I was just trying to paint the big picture with the numbers that were given. That once again, I'll just recap quickly. 400,000 would be a ballpark of what we would pay to the city of Lake Forest for all the services. We would bill to our residents two and a quarter, approximately, for all of the services, and then we might actually collect about 100,000. So that leaves a lot for, the village to be responsible for. And, big picture for past, in comparison to past years, I don't know how that relates, because we're all looking at where is the money going to come from this year, and what did we do last year. So I don't know if you might be able to help me with that, Drew, or Bettina, kind of look at, historically, how does this compare?
Barbara, the question, historically comparing which figures?
Overall, what we're paying to the city of Lake Forest, and overall what we are, as a village, needing to absorb because we only collect X, which is, just over 100,000 from the users.
So our rates have increased, and remember this is part of a big resolution going back over many years, trying to resolve a dispute between billings, really over 4 years, I think by the end of it all. I guess what I can go, this could take a very long time to explain all this. But I think maybe the simplest way to do that, and if there's holes in the explanation, please, I will be happy to fill them in. But so historically, the village has charged a rate that was largely tied to our rate with Lake Forest. Because Lake Forest rate is going up, the village is looking to raise its rate to correspond with those increasing rates. At the same time, we're also trying to capture payment for services rendered that are consistent with what other EMS departments are capturing, and it's also to reflect our new rates that were being charged by Lake Forest as well, knowing that the village is going to continue to subsidize these activities, but to get some form of payment, because right now we only bill patients that are transported. So if there's any services rendered, and it can be a variety of basic life support or even advanced life support at a scene, and if we don't transport, there's no bill issued. So now we're trying to capture those moments in time and capture in terms of having an appropriate fee schedule so that the village can realize compensation for those. And that's really the point of this. And again, to more align with how we've done in the past, is have the users cover the charges to the extent that are practicable. The biggest issue here is that the percentage of Medicare and Medicaid eligible patients that our department treats and sees on a regular basis is about 57% in that neighborhood. So the idea that we're very much limited in what we can bill those individuals. So when we transport those folks, and if we send them a bill for whether it's $1,000 or $1 million, we're only getting what is approved for ALS or BLS transports for Medicare or Medicaid, which is substantially less. So immediately we're only capturing about 45% of those receipts.
Right. So a normal transport bill would be $1,732, and we could collect 400-ish. So every time that happens, we're subsidizing $1,300.
And which, as you can tell, is because of our makeup of our patient base is more often than not.
Right. Right.
Do we have a similar constraint on private insurance payers?
So no, we don't. So for those that can pay and have insurance or good insurance, we are capturing more of that bill.
Aaron, do you have a kids program on in the background?
I do not.
Oh.
I do hear it though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear it as well.
All of us, I think, can hear it.
Okay, I apologize for that. So at the end of the memo, it says, if implemented as proposed, the village would capture an estimated $3,000 to $5,000 annually to offset service provision. So is that just looking at these no transport fees of $250 and
that is correct. Yep.
So that's what we're talking about here, is that those new fees are going to kind of do something as opposed to nothing. It's not zero anymore.
That is correct. That should have stated, and originally that there was no. This was a last minute change to the memorandum, so forgive me for that update. But originally that was to state that these fees are really that extra $3,000 to $5,000 annually is a conservative number, but that's only to represent any non-transport related services.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I actually had kind of gonculated something, and I came up with a number that was slightly bigger. But I think we get it now that this is the memo is addressing these new fees that will kind of fill in some of the blanks. And if there are any further comments on that, we're kind of running out of time, and we haven't even gotten to our final item, which perhaps we could move to the next Finance Committee meeting, although the timing of this is really important. It's a discussion regarding an update to the local stimulus grant program, and that the window for that is kind of coming to a close. So what might you suggest that we do at this point, Drew? Should we continue it to the next meeting? And that's really cutting it close.
We can continue both these
I have
items.
no objection to sending that item to the board with a recommendation to approve. I don't know that I need to discuss it.
Bill, what are your thoughts?
Well, we can go to the full board and have the discussion there. Maybe that's the way to do it.
Okay. I think that would be, if that is acceptable to Drew and to Bettina.
Well, we can also try to do we can do a special meeting too if you want to, if we want to discuss these more. And I mean, there's really, I don't know that there's I think they could probably both wait, or we can alternatively, I mean, we had originally planned on bringing the stormwater utility tax conversation to the next meeting and trying to have the bulk of the conversation around that. And that's the October meeting. So it's truly, if there's not a lot of concerns with either item, we can bring both to the village board, the ambulance fee change as well as the stimulus program. It's probably.
I would like to talk about it a little bit more. I had some questions, and I, on the face of it, it sounds kind of good, but I just really want to have it be laid out exactly what it is that we're agreeing to and why, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think I'd rather not just put it through. I'd rather have a conversation and have it. It doesn't have to be lengthy, but I just think it's important to really understand what it is that we're doing.
So why don't we do this? Why don't we?
Sorry, Drew. I was going to suggest a special session because we got a lot of hard work to do. I take a special session some other day soon.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, if we can schedule one, and if not, at the latest by the 2 weeks from tonight.
Do we need a motion for that?
That'll be the direction. There's nobody opposing that. So.
Perfect. Okay, great. And we have some informational items. Do we want to delay that, or given that it's 7:01?
Probably.
Okay. All right. So At this point in time, do we have a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee meeting?
The only thing I would ask, Chair Anchorman, maybe you want to ask if there's anybody else who didn't, there was more people on this call now that they're, I'm guessing, anticipating the village board meeting starting very soon, but there may be somebody wishing to comment on something that didn't get a chance to, so.
Glenn, do we have anybody who would wish to speak?
Nobody has raised their hand. Yeah.
Do we take the precaution of reinitiating the Zoom, or do we assume that we're not going to have that crosstalk again?
I think we go with what we have now. It's working fine.
Okay. All right.
And so do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.